Good afternoon, folks. My name is David Lamb, and I'm with the Soil Health Institute, and I want to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon as part of the Healthy Soil Farmer Showcase. I appreciate everybody taking the time out of their busy schedules and joining us and participating in the farmer or the poll that we're having today. And we'll give you the results of that more towards the end of that. Today, we're going to talk about the soil health challenges that you find in the Mississippi Delta area and what works and what doesn't. And we're fortunate to have a producer, Sledge Taylor, who'll be on in a little bit, along with Parker Frew, who works for the Delta Farm Group, which I hope that many of you recognize and have worked with in the past. But when we get started, I thought I'd give a little background of where this project or where this webinar comes from. It's part of an effort called the Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton Project, which is a joint project between the Soil Health Institute and with funding from our partners from Wrangler Jeans and the Walmart Foundation. So it's always nice to have some supporting money that allows us to do projects like this and some other things. Most of you probably have not heard much about the Soil Health Institute. We've been around for 5 or 6 years. Our primary person, we're a not-for-profit group, and our mission is to safeguard and enhance the vitality and productivity of soil through scientific research and advancement. So what we're trying to do is build the scientific base behind soil health. I spent 40 years working for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, closed out my career as being part of the soil health team, and I got so tired of hearing, where's the science behind what you're doing? Well, the science is all over the place. And that's one of the things what we're trying to do at the Institute is to bring that and make it more apparent and easier for folks to find. Again, I'd like to thank folks like Wrangler and the Walmart Foundation for supporting this. And the key here is I spent 40 years working for Uncle Sam, and most of the efforts I did, Uncle Sam was providing the money to support the educational outreach efforts that we did through the NRCS. This is totally private sector funding, which I think is something new to the agricultural area, and we're coming from the marketplace. You know, what's Walmart, what's Wrangler? They sell jeans, they sell a lot of cotton products, so they have a very vital interest in what we're trying to do here. The project itself has 2 key components. One, we're trying to increase the adoption of the soil health management system. If you want to know what that is, you're going to hear one when Sledge talks here in a little bit. He'll go through exactly what he's doing to improve the soil health on his farm. Pre-COVID, what we tried to do is have a lot of field days and workshops. We had identified my mentors, such as Sledge, as somebody you could contact and work with, identified as soil health specialists, such as Parker, who could come out to your farm. And those were some of the objectives when we first started, but we all know what's happened with that. We've had to go to this more virtual world, which really isn't so bad, I guess, because I was teasing the guys the other day. I can remember many a field day or winter meeting sitting in a cold tool shed with the wind blowing and the roof rattling, and everybody's in coveralls trying to stay warm, listen to a speaker. So sit at your desk or your comfortable lounge chair is not such a bad thing, especially if we're going to hear a quality presentation like we got coming on here. And the other second part of our project is to how can we quantify the results? Folks like the Walmart Foundation like to know, what is it their producers are doing to help them tell the story about sustainability and regenerative ag. And that's another component of our project there. There's going to be, besides this one, we've got 7 more, every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Our next one's going to be in Texas, where we're going to talk about lessons for long-term sites. But again, these are going to be recorded. Hopefully you can participate next week. You will be getting a reminder about all these. You don't have to go back and register again. Once you register once, you'll be getting notifications about the future ones. And then at some point after they're done, we're going to make these all available for replay for folks who may not have gotten part of it. But when I want to start off, set the stage here. What is soil health? Well, soil health is the idea of a soil having the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. We're talking about sustainability, farming management practices that are long-term. We're not talking a year or two. We're talking 10, 20, 50 years in the future that we're trying to improve the soil functions that are necessary for food and fiber production. We're trying to get farmers to look at soil as a living ecosystem. It's no longer this inert conglomeration of sand, silts, and clays. No, there's a living biological community down there that's being managed or manipulated by what you do in your farming practices. And then those soil functions that you need to produce cotton, to produce corn, whatever. It's always surprised me that producers really aren't aware of what happens down in the soil profile and how important it is to have a diverse biological community. What's happened? Well, we cycle nutrients. Most of the nutrients put on a field don't get into the plant that year. It goes through its biological nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, and so forth. We've all heard about those. Soil is very important for, we want water to infiltrate. We don't want it to run off. We want it to be there when the plant needs it come, June, July, or August, whenever, we need it. We expect our soils to filter and buffer out pollutants, those products we apply. We like to need a biological process that breaks those down. Big one here is we got to be able to cross the field. It's no good to have a nice cotton crop out there if you can't harvest it. So we need to have a physical, stable platform in which to run our pickers and those types of things. And the last one there, that's habitat for biodiversity. That's the key there. The more diversity, the more biological activity is taking place in the soil, the better the nutrient cycle, the water infiltrates, and those types of things. And 90% of those functions that are necessary for food and fiber production are all mediated or driven by the soil microbial community that's in your soil. And what you're going to hear is Sledge is going to talk about what he's doing and how that's improved those functions. There's 4 basic principles that are pretty easy to remember. We want to see you minimizing disturbance and you maximize cover. Why? Because that protects the soil. It protects that habitat those microbes live in, protects those soil aggregates that allow for pore spaces to be of diverse size, lets water infiltrate, holds on to it. And it also helps to protect the organic matter. We're no longer burning it off through tillage. We're increasing organic matter, which has a positive effect. And the other 2 principles are maximizing soil living roots. Get plants, sun shines every day, get a lot of root, solar or photosynthetic activity takes place outside of the cropping season. That's important to feed those biological communities. And then we want to maximize diversity. We have very monoculture cropping systems in the United States, and cotton is one of those. What we're trying to do is create a condition where we can have a Q&A. It'd be nice if everybody could have their phone open, but that's not going to be possible with all the folks that we have on board. So if you got a question, go ahead and type it in. Down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a question, a Q&A, and you just send it out. If you don't want me to see your name, you can select send anonymously, that's fine. And I'll be asking questions of Sledge and Parker as we go along the way. Or if I see something that I might be able to respond to just real quickly, we can do that along the way too. So with that, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to turn it over to Parker, Frew, and I'm going to let these gentlemen introduce themselves. Parker's new to the Delta Farm Group, and Sledge has been farming in Northeast Mississippi for a number of years, more than 30 years, I believe. So I'm going to let them do a better job of introducing themselves. So as I stop sharing, I'm going to turn it over to Parker and Sledge, and they're going to continue on with the presentation here.
Thank you, David. As David mentioned a second ago, my name is Parker Frew. I'm the soil health specialist and program manager here at Delta Farm. Through this grant, we've been able to work with David and the Soil Health Institute to come up with, a mentor that we can identify that can help us. Being young in the agriculture industry, I've got a few years of experience, but having somebody like Sledge really helps. And I hope today that we can kind of show you his years of experience and what we've seen and what we think works. And I'll kind of give you a background on Delta Farm, who we are. Delta Farm stands for Farmers Advocating Resource Management. We were established in 1998 by a group of farm operators and landowners to face growing environmental issues surrounding production agriculture. The main goal of Delta Farm is to address natural resource concerns and to help facilitate environmental improvements on farms. We have over 1.5 million acres enrolled in Delta Farm today, and through various organizations, we've been able to fund and implement around 6,000 acres of cover crop just last fall. And all these cover crops demonstrate minimal till systems and soil health systems, and it's really allowed us to let farmers really get their feet wet and try and see what they want. But with that, I'll turn it over to Sledge Taylor, our soil health mentor.
Thank you, Parker. My name is Sledge Taylor. I'm a farmer from North Mississippi. I think this is 47 years I've been farming, and we farm about 4,500 acres, and about 3,500 acres of that land is in cotton. I'd also like to thank the Soil Health Institute for making this series on soil health possible. And I really appreciate Parker and Delta Farm helping me with this presentation. And I am speaking today from the Delta Farm offices in Stoneville, Mississippi. I'd like to start with a quote, and we don't know who said this quote, but I think it's very appropriate. And it's, despite all of mankind's scientific achievements and artistic achievements, all the things we've built, all the rocket ships we've done, we owe our existence to 6 inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains. Now, you think about that. Us as farmers have been somewhat charged with taking care of that 6 inches of topsoil and the rainfall that falls upon our farms. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about today. And I think there's a lot of improvement that we can all make into taking care of that topsoil and capturing more of the rainfall. How is it in Mississippi that when we get 55 inches average rainfall a year, that we're 2 weeks away from a drought? Well, most of you are going to say, well, it's because we get most of the rainfall in the winter months and in spring, and we get these 2, 3, 4, 5 inch rains that run off. And that's true. But still, we get 55 inches of rain, and surely we can do better with that. And, you know, what if we could just capture 20% of the water that runs off our field back into the soil? And I think we can do that. On our farm, I think we've stretched just using proper soil health principles. We've gone to 3 weeks between rains, perhaps before we're in a drought. And I really think that in the future, we'll be able to go stretch it out further. Well, now what does this mean? Well, there's a lot of things. Number one, we're infiltrating more water into our soil, so people downstream may not have to deal with this quite as much. We don't have as much runoff that's carrying through erosion, soil particles, or fertilizer. And also, I think this is possible. We have a water table underneath us that we can recharge. And so I think it holds a lot of promise for all of that. I've no-tilled since 1985 in some shape, form, or fashion. And I thought for years that no-till was probably the answer. And although I'd grown cover crops, and always after growing a cover crop, my crops did very well, I just never did quite see the value of the cover crops as well. And in the last few years, I've really come to realize the importance of the cover crop. So I think through no-till and cover crops, we can achieve a lot of these goals for more water infiltration. Hold on, let me see why this isn't working. There we go. Okay, I don't want to talk too much about my family other than to say that we've farmed for several generations. We have farmed in 2 different locations for over 100 years. One location is in the eastern edge of the Mississippi Delta, right close to the bluff. In fact, some of the property joins the bluff, and the other area we farm is in the kind of the rolling hills area near Commo, Mississippi. Now, I first started with some of our soil health projects in the hills where erosion was very evident, but I did move it to the better soils in our creek bottoms in the hills, and then also in the Delta, and it's very effective even on our better soils. And so that's pretty much it as far as my family involvement. Maybe we can get into some more of that later. The soil health challenges in Mississippi. Well, you know, I really don't think that maybe we get a little bit more waterlogging or whatever in the Delta, but for the most part, I don't think our soil health challenges are any greater in Mississippi than they are anywhere else that's in the Mid-South or the Southeast. I think our biggest challenge is in our mind. And it's just, how do we get the mindset that we're going to try some of this? And I certainly wouldn't tell you to go 100% the first year. 5, 10, 15% of your crop, perhaps, whatever you're comfortable with. But our mind, and I've just seen it on my own operation, you see the answer sometimes, but it just takes some little nudge sometimes to get you to adopt a new practice. Maybe we worry about what our neighbors think. I don't know. You fill in the blanks. But all that to say, there's any number of videos on YouTube. When I first started, the information was really hard to come by. Now there's just so much information out there through Google or through YouTube that you should be able to find any answer, or find somebody that is doing something like myself or even better. So my challenge, I want to turn it around. My challenge is to you is to try some no-till, try some cover crop, and just kind of see what it does for you. And I just want to mention, years ago, I read an article, probably in the early 80s, by Dr. Gordon Tupper, who was actually a research scientist, ag engineer here from Stoneville, Mississippi. And one of the first things he did, I guess, was he was the man that designed and implemented the parabolic subsoiler. And he was doing research for deep placement of phosphate and potash, and I thought maybe held some promise, which I don't think that panned out. But anyway, I read an article by him, and he said if you had really good cotton land and you had good soil health and good fertility, that probably 9 out of 10 years irrigation didn't pay. And maybe it was 8 years, I don't know, but you get the picture. If everything's right in your soil, cotton especially can go through a lot without irrigation. Now, don't get me wrong, there's no substitute for irrigation when you need it. And but I can only irrigate about 35% of our acreage, so I've had to implement other strategies to kind of mitigate and improve our soil where we cannot irrigate. Okay, well, the first steps were taken, I guess, was in the early 80s. I started going to the Milan, Tennessee research station in Milan, Tennessee, to a no-till field day. And where they would showcase a lot of the no-till they were doing, and they would show the new equipment. And I did that for about 4 years. And 1985 was the first year we planted no-till. And it was kind of frustrating. And one of the guys that was working for me got frustrated when we were planting. And he finally looked at me and he said, I just want to know, how are we going to plow this? And I told him we were not. And he said, well, that's kind of what I thought. And I don't think he thought it was going to be good enough to plow. But so anyway, when you do this, try to, and I didn't realize I had not done it, but when you begin to change, explain the situation to your employees, because once they're on board, you've got a whole lot of, your battle's pretty much 2/3 won, because generally, if your farm's like mine, people look at you and say, well, we've never done it that way before. Hopefully I can spark something in you. If just one person tries this, I would say it's a success. But whatever you do, do your homework. Don't go into it half-hearted. If you're going to try no-till, if you're going to try cover crops, don't say you're going to try it. Say you're going to make it work. And all right. As I said, we farm in the eastern edge of the Delta and in the hill region. And usually in the hill region, soil erosion is a little bit more evident than it is in the Delta. But believe me, soil erosion in the Delta is occurring too, a lot more than we think. And probably most of you can look in your tail ditches and have to clean your tail ditches out every few years, and you realize there is soil erosion going on. And of course, we get these great big rain events that do something like you see here. Would no-till and cover crop have prevented this? Probably not, but it certainly would have not been nearly as bad. So anyway, ask yourself, in this word difficult up here, what is it that makes it difficult? Well, there again, I don't think we have much other different problems than the rest of the rain belt. But what makes it difficult, again, is in our mindset. And if I could sit down with you and you could tell me all the reasons it wouldn't work on your farm, I think I could sit down with you and probably dispel most of those ideas, because I have made it work on our farm. There we go. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. Should it be complicated? No, I don't think cover crop should be complicated. You know, we see some blends going out there that, you know, 10, 12, 14 different type of seed, which biodiversity is great, but I think if you're going to get started, let's keep it simple. You've basically got a choice between what I call our grasses. You've got wheat, you've got cereal rye, you've got triticale, which is a combination of the two, and we've got things like black oats. Then with our legumes, you've got like vetch, you have Austrian winter peas and clover. And then if you plant early enough, you can use these tillage radishes. And I think a three-way mix like that is plenty enough, even if you don't do but two. But I really do think you need to have at least two in a mix. And there again, start slow and you can learn and go on from there. All right, let's go.
Hey, Sledge.
Yes.
When you're mixing putting a mix together, how do you adjust it? You know, how much seed to use per acre, and how do you know how much you know, grasses and legumes and the radishes to put in there? What kind of rule of thumb are you using there?
Yeah, well, David, that's a good point. This year, I had a little program that somebody gave me, and you could kind of play around with it and show you which mixes to make. Typically, I would say probably 50 pounds of total mix, 50 to 60 pounds of total mix, a couple of pounds of these tillage radishes, and about 40 pounds of your cereal, or maybe a little bit more of your cereal, and the rest would be in your legumes, which would be kind of a ballpark figure. But there are I think computer programs, and there's data out there to kind of show you which mix would be best for you.
So the idea of 2 bushels of cereal rye and then putting it on real heavy, you're not thinking that's a good idea?
I've got some photographs a little bit later in here, David, that show where I put about 140 pounds of wheat that I planted one year, and it did really well. And I'll show you how it looks. But I really, you know, if usually cost is going to be when you get ready to do a cover crop, at least in my situation, cost is going to be one of the primary factors. And I think if we can kind of scale it back a little bit and get people started on it, and then if they decide to go a little bit heavier, we can.
Okay.
So, all right. Which slide are we on now? This one here. Okay, great. Well, just like I said, now this year we planted about 2,300 acres of cover crops on our farm. Our total farm is about 4,500 acres, so we're right in there at 50%, just a little bit over of our cover crop. We flew on about 1,600 acres of cover crop, and then we planted about another 700 acres with a grain drill. For years, every year I tell myself, okay, this is going to be the year, and because I don't like to pay anybody like the airplane pilot to do something that I can do myself. And every year I tell myself, well, this is going to be the year we get the crop out. And cotton's a little different than soybeans. Soybeans, you can get the crop out a little bit earlier and do that, but generally by the time we harvest and cut stalks, we're a little bit later in the year for cotton. So a few years I told myself that I was going to get around to it. Well, a few years ago, I finally decided that it wasn't going to happen and I needed to do this. So we started using an airplane. I've had very good success of flying in cover crop seed and our standing corn before we harvest it. Usually the first, where we've been planting kind of late in the last few years, but usually the first or second week in September is when we fly it on. I don't like to really do it much earlier than that because you get into a problem with armyworms. But that gives these tillage radishes a chance to really get started and grow. Once we get into October, the tillage radishes often don't get quite enough size and you get a little winter kill out of them. I don't know how other people deal with it, but that's just been my experience. Later this year, after we got through picking the cotton, we were able to cut stalks and get some cover crop planted with our grain drill as well. And here we are. You know what an airplane flying over the field would look like, but here we are. This is a 20-foot John Deere 750 grain drill, no till. I've got a big air seeder that we have used in the past, but it was just simpler to use this one this time. This is the last field we planted, and you see all that green out there, and you're going to say, why is he planting in that green? Well, that's I'm going to go next one. Where's it going to go? That's mostly poana and henbit, and that makes a pretty good cover crop in itself. That wheat and I dropped the radish by now, but that wheat, that rye and Austrian winter peas has come up through that and will do fine. And that's one example there. Even if you don't use a cover crop, if you no-till, there's actually a little cover out there on that ground, protecting that ground and from raindrops and actually adding a little bit of organic matter back to the ground.
Sledge, do you have any trouble with seed separating as you're going across the field like that? And I had a question come in about, have you had any trouble finding seed and availability and that kind of thing?
Well, generally, if you start early enough, and in the middle of the summer, sometimes it's hard to be thinking about a cover crop. But generally, if you start looking in August, the seed are available. Now, what I have done is bought it from a seed dealer that actually blended the seed for me. That's one thing I'd like to probably address on the operation. I don't really know that I want to start blending my own seed, but you do need, if you're going to layer them in your grain box, that may be, it's possible, but I'd much rather mix my seed before we put them in it's just easier labor-wise to put it in there all mixed.
Have you any trouble if it's sorting or separating out as it bounce across the field like that, or?
No trouble. It seems to, I've not noticed any difference of it being more of one crop in one spot than the other. So let's go on to cover crop and how to manage it. Now you look at this cover crop, now you imagine all these roots down in the ground during the wintertime, all that activity, and whatever you see on top of the ground, you've got just as much or more going on under the ground. And you got all that root mass and all that underground. So you see that we're adding a lot of organic matter back to the ground, and a lot of winter rain will infiltrate into the soil. But when we talk about how to manage it, I usually think about what we do before we plant the next spring. And I like to start about a month ahead of time burning down my cover crop. Now I know I don't get quite as much mass on top of the ground that way. I go to 3 weeks, sometimes I've gone to 2 weeks, but certainly I like my cover crop to be dead before we plant into it. Now I see people planting into green cover crop, they roll it, they don't terminate it with herbicides. I'm gonna try it on about 10 or 15 acres this year, just to kind of give it a try and see what I think. But one of the things that bothers me, as long as that cover crop is out there, it's pulling moisture out of the ground. And especially if we get into a little dry period, you may be planting into some soil that the roots have taken the moisture out of. So especially if it looks like you're going to go into a dry period, I'd go ahead and terminate that cover crop 3 to 4 weeks before you plant. Let's see. Okay. This Parker took this with a drone. This is probably about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks after we seeded this cover crop and standing corn. Now, right where you're looking is kind of flat. I don't know, the combine may have made a trip, or that's where the grain buggy went. But if you look over to the right or the left, you'll see the standing corn stalks there. They will not give us a problem when we go to plant next year. This is just another view of it. This is in the Delta. You see the bluff there in the distance. Just another example. Obviously we had a little bit of leftover nitrogen behind this corn. This cover crop is taking up that nitrogen, is sequestering it in those plants along with some phosphate and potash too. And when it dies back down, it'll release it next summer in more of an organic form. I think that's good for the crop.
Hey.
Yes, sir.
Have you had much issues with ruts, tractor ruts, and what do you do with that? Or does that help? Like I said, does that provide that platform to cross pretty easy, or how do you deal with that?
Well, one thing about, and of course, most of the land we farm is a sandy loam or a silty loam soil. I try not to ever get on the soil when it's too wet, but I tell you that no-till, you get such good water infiltration, and it's just the matter of that matted root system on top of the ground. We can go in no-till. I mean, we can get back into a no-till field 2 or 3 days before we can go into a till field. It just holds up equipment better. And now if occasionally we rut something up and we'll have to work the ground up, but you know, we all have that problem.
Well, Sledge, did you notice that when you started using more cover crops, what change did you see that between just straight no-till on your soil?
Oh, I think you see the soil tilth, the soil gets a little bit more mellow. There again, you going into it in the spring after a wet spring, it helps hold the equipment up better. I mean, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of activity. You even, I think the earthworms are probably a little bit more prominent in the no-till. I mean, in the cover crop fields as well. But it's a good way, and I've done some reading on that, David, and those roots are actually exuding, I think, the research I've read, liquid carbon into the ground. And there's a whole lot going on in these cover crops biologically that I don't completely understand. I do see a synergy from these cover crops, and I don't completely understand it, but I think it's just due to a lot of increased biological activity.
Okay.
Right. This was taken, we planted this about I think the 14th of September. And this picture was taken the 20th of November. So we're looking at just a little over 2 months. That's one of the tillage radishes. That's about a 12-inch long radish. You see my pocket knife there for a kind of a reference point. That's a lot of that's a lot of mass right there, and it's breaking that soil up and it's adding organic matter. And here's another one. I don't know, maybe it hit a little hard pan, I don't know, but here's another just example of the same thing at the same time. And I mentioned to you about planting in the spring, and those corn stalks didn't give us a problem. That we're actually planting peanuts here. But I also planted cotton just like this. This was a corn crop that we planted and we flew in 19, and we flew a cover crop on in the corn in 2019. And this is planting in the spring of 2020. And you can tell by the way my truck's moving, these are old rows. It's not flat ground. And so we're just going back in on these old rows. Basically, it's a regular planter. We've got the row cleaners on front. Now, this one, it is a hydraulic drive planter, which helps because those stalks don't throw your chains off. But I've got 2 other planters that have chains, and we've just rigged a covering over it. And that planter has air hold down on it, which helps, but the other planters just have big, heavy hold down springs on it.
So does the ground get hard, or can you have much trouble getting that thing in the ground?
No, that ground is as mellow as it can be. I mean, you just about take your finger and push it into that ground. It's so mellow. And those row cleaners sweep the trash away from the row, and then allow your double disc openers to penetrate. And it's a little bit of an art form there to kind of get your planter set right. And I stay pretty close to the field. You just don't set your planter and necessarily leave, not in the beginning anyway. But here's another example of cotton planted. Well, the first slide was cotton planted behind the cover crop. This is just the cotton planted behind corn. I just have it there to show you how that mass of cotton on top of the ground is protecting the soil. I think that's a pretty good stand of cotton. I mean, I actually have less crusting in no-till, and I actually have an easier time getting a stand of cotton in no-till than I do regular till ground.
Is the soil colder, wetter? What are you planting into there?
Yeah, that's the soil will be a little bit colder, but I don't generally like to plant cotton until about the 5th of May anyway, so I'm not planting real early in the season. And I want you to notice the color of this cotton as it comes up. You see how green it is? You don't see any yellowing. There's not any dirt splashing up. We get a lot of disease on these seedlings when a raindrop hits that bare soil and splashes that gritty sand up against, and it's abrasive. And so anyway, here's another example. Now, you see the bluff in the background. Now this is an interesting story. This was about the 21st of May that we were planting this. It was drizzling rain, and I had heavy crop matter out there, and we'd started in another field, and our row cleaners were balling up, and I kind of panicked, and I said, we got to do something. So I burned this field off and planted it. It got a great stand, but here in another slide, you'll see a field that we did not burn off, and we got a great stand there. But you got to be adaptive. Now here's the field here that when it was raining and drizzling, all that plant matter was giving us a little bit of problem. Had it been sunny, it would have been fine. But we were toward the end of the season, and I wanted to get the crop planted and panic. But you can get a stand of cotton and stuff like that. And,
so did your herbicide program change, or what are you doing there?
Pretty much the same herbicide program, David. I use Cotoran. I come behind the planter with Cotoran and Gramoxone. I like to mix up my chemicals, but we come behind the planter with Gramoxone to burn down any pigweed that might be present. And we use Cotoran for pre-emergent. Now this is some of the peanuts I just planted, for example, when that planter was running a while ago. I just wanted to show you see all that organic matter on the ground, protecting the ground, protecting the seedlings from both raindrops and wind. A lot of these fields, this ground get hard packed, and you get a big north wind blowing 30, 40 miles an hour. You can see sheets of sand going across the top of that field, and it's pretty rough on cotton seedlings. Just if you look real close, you can see some seedlings just barely coming up here. This is 2020. This was cotton planted, no-till, non-irrigated. The field in the foreground is in a little creek bottom. I estimate it made 3 bales. That on the back over there is pretty thin sloping ground. I had 300 acres like this, about half hill and about half bottom, no irrigation. And it made 1,425 pounds. Now, obviously, I had some that didn't do that well either, and I'm trying to figure it out, but that's what you can do. This was taken in about 2015. This is a completely hill farm. It's all rolling. When I planted my first no-till crop on this farm in about 1987, it belonged to my John Deere dealer, who was older than my father and quite a mentor to me. And I told him I was going to plant no-till beans. And he didn't like the idea. And he said, no-till means no combine. And of course, I kidded him. I said, no-till means no disc bearings and no cultivators and a lot of that. But anyway, he was all excited because after the first big rain, he found and he said, the water running out of that field was clear spring water. So he was very excited. Now this is where I'm talking about. We planted probably about 130 pounds of wheat. And this is on some pretty tight hill ground. It's got a little bit more clay in it. And the cotton was still coming up. My stand was a little bit uneven to begin with, but it was still coming up. Some of it was gone just a little bit deeper. But that's what about 130 pounds of wheat looks like. But you can still get a stand of cotton in it. And that cover crop helps to shield the cotton. It just seems to grow off a little faster. There's something biological going on there too because of the cotton.
So I've heard entomologists say cover crops increase weed pressure, or not weed pressure, insect disease. What's been your experience? You got more nematodes? I know.
The only thing I would say is, and I meant to mention this earlier, that's just one more example of a hill farm wheat cover crop and planted no-till. But I do, when we plant our cotton, we put the recommended rate, which is a pretty low rate, of a pyrethroid behind our planter, because cutworms will come and they lay their eggs in that cover crop and they'll hatch out just about the time that cotton comes up. So I do put out a pyrethroid behind the planter to take care of the cutworms. But other than that, I really see no increase in insect pressure whatsoever. In fact, we get a little bit more beneficials. You'll see more ladybugs, more other lacewings and different kind of bugs out there that are beneficial.
So you're not afraid of having a few bugs. You just like to make sure they're the friendly kind, huh?
Exactly. That's cool. So this was taken this year, Parker. I came up and took this picture. This was, again, another cotton field with a cover crop. I mean, a corn field with a cover crop. We killed it. We planted it. You see it's a good stand. I'm on the lower end of the field. Behind me is a road, and behind that is another cotton field. I had the capability of irrigating this field, but it's from a lake. We had a little problem with the pipe, and I just didn't irrigate this field. The field behind me, we did irrigate, although I admit I was a little bit late irrigating it. We had one of those 90% chances of a 2-inch rain, and it didn't materialize, and so I was a little late getting the water on the field behind me. But this no-till behind the cover crop and corn made more than the irrigated field behind me, and a part of that's my fault for the management.
But this did not get any irrigation water?
This did not get any irrigation water, and I mean, it made very good cotton.
Do you have trouble getting watered from one end to the other when you go into a situation like when you do irrigate? I assume you're doing some flood or furrow irrigation. Is that
we will. If we have time in the spring, we'll run something like a hipper chopper. We'll make one pass with a hipper chopper in the land that we're going to furrow irrigate, and we've got some pivot irrigation too. It doesn't matter, but on the furrow irrigated, we'll run a hipper chopper in the spring before we plant, or if we don't, this past year, we didn't have a chance to do that. And so once we planted and the crop came up and got a little size to it, we ran a Orthman middle buster through it with a little smaller plow on it and just kind of plowed out that furrow for the irrigation water to go down.
Okay.
Record rainfall and how soil health can help. Well, it rained from January, well, actually it rained from November of 19, but from January 1st of 2020 to May 1st of 2020, we did 5 days field work with tillage equipment in the field. We obviously ran our sprayers and things, but and my guys kept saying, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I said, well, each week I'd say, well, looks like we're going to plant a little bit more no-till. Looks like we're going to plant more no-till. And the 1st of May, we finally were able to go to the field and we planted our corn, which is late for us, but it did okay. And then I didn't want to necessarily plant my peanuts no-till, but by the time we'd worked up the peanut ground, we were running out of the window for both peanuts and cotton. So we planted our peanuts no-till, and then we planted our cotton no-till. And so that's one of the great benefits is, you know, normally I would have been stressed out trying to get all the field work done, but you know, we kind of got tired of looking at each other in the shop, and we cleaned the shop several times. But that's one advantage, and I guess pretty much one of the greatest advantages of how when you have heavy rainfall, you can just you got to be able to adapt, and that's what we did. All right, there again, this is a drone picture that Parker took, and just seeing a good cover crop on the field is one good indicator. And we'll go to the next slide now. And now that's earthworm castings. A lot of you are probably familiar with that. It's, or you may want to call it earthworm poop, but they love organic matter on top of the ground. Earthworms love shade. They hate tillage. And so when you don't till and you've got some organic matter on top of the ground for them, you're going to see, especially after like a day or two after a rain, they come up and you've got all these earthworm tunnels and all this earthworm castings. And those earthworm castings, they tell me, are pH neutral there. They got a pH of 7. The earthworms are actually taking nutrients in the soil and kind of converting them into organic compounds, or more of an organic fertilizer. And there again, it's just evidence of that biological activity that I think, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, this is not my thought, and I'm quoting other people, but where in nature do you see nature till the soil? You know, for hundreds of millions of years, nature has gotten along with all these organisms working together, whether it's the prairie or the forest or anywhere else, and nature doesn't till the soil. So we're just kind of putting nature's biological team together to help us out. All right, I guess one of the biggest benefits for us, at least, is our yields have increased, and I think it's due to the healthy soil. So that's one of the biggest benefits, especially where we can't irrigate. And so that's one benefit. Another benefit is, you know, we're cutting our cost. We just, I guess to give you an example, one of the biggest tractors on the farm, well, we've got a 340 horsepower tractor on the farm, and we only put about 300 hours a year on that tractor now. And most of that, probably 65% of that, was cutting stalks in the fall because we just hadn't used the tractor much and I wanted to get some hours on it. But anyway, so that's another benefit. You're just not wearing out this big expensive equipment. You're not wearing out you're not replacing disc bearings, etc. And the third part of it is, I think we're making a little bit a better profit. I mean, it's, and we also have a little bit more time for the family. Now, maybe we could go out and rent some more ground, but in that time, but the last couple of years, we've been able to take some weekends off where normally I'd be out there busting the ground up and doing all such as that. And that's a nice benefit.
Yep. Can't argue that, Sledge, that's for sure.
Yeah. And again, this is just another view of the photo I showed you earlier. This year's cotton, non-irrigated, that's no-till cotton, following no-till cotton, soil with a good soil health and fertility program. Not the best soil in the world, but you can, you see, I mean, that's, you'd be hard pressed to find any better looking cotton than that this year anywhere in the state. So that's kind of proof of the pudding there. A few years ago, some people came to the farm and they were asking about some of the no-till practices we were doing, and they didn't want they didn't want anything scripted, so they were just asking me questions and kind of recording while I answered, and they caught me saying this, and farming is definitely a science, but it's also an art, especially when it comes to no-till. But the second half of that quote is, and this farm is our canvas. And I firmly believe that all of our farms are our canvas. We may not think of ourselves as being creative people, but we are creating, if you want to kind of get a little poetic, we are creating masterpieces on our farm, and it'll be our legacy that we leave behind. So I'm really enthused. I think there's really a lot of potential. And I just would love to drive down through the Delta in February one year and see a good portion of the Delta covered in cover crops. So anyway, that's pretty much it. And I'm really glad to have been here today and share a few ideas. And I hope you found it worthwhile. Thank you.
We got some questions here before we bring in a little more on the economics with Archie. Let's spend a few minutes. Let's say Parker's coming to you there Sledge and he wants to get started. Now, what would be your recommendation? I want to plant some cotton. What kind of cover crop should I be using, and what would be your solution to season?
Well, I'd recommend probably that three-way mix if he was going to plant a cover crop. I particularly like the rye, but wheat and triticale work well. So pick one of those or some black oats. I kind of like the rye myself. Then pick your legume to go with it. And if you can get your cover crop planted early enough, I'd put a little tillage radish in it. And if money's a problem, I'd just use two of them. And that's where I'd start. It's pretty simple. You need a planter that, and these row cleaners are not, I mean, they're expensive, but I think they're about, I forget, five, maybe $600 an acre. $500 to $600 a row. So you got a 12 row machine, you're going to spend a little over probably $6,000 to put those row cleaners on it. Pretty much the rest of the planter is stock. Now you do need hold down springs on it, but you can find good used planters pretty reasonable that has that on it. And I don't know, you always need a disc or something around the farm, but I just would, if you really wanted to start, I'd start with cover crop, and then I'd come back with my planter the next spring and till planter and plant.
What about your fertility? We've had a couple questions wanting to know what kind of fertility. I always say we can cut all our fertilizer out. Is that what you've done, or?
No, I've not gotten to that point yet. Now maybe I'm just not so much a big proponent of that yet. I may change my mind. I'm still using my regular fertility program. I know there's evidence out there to show that after several years of cover crops that you can probably cut your fertilizer down. But on my fertilizer, I'm more of a balance. I don't necessarily look at what the crop's taking out or whatever. I like to see a balanced soil. I like to see my calcium and potash ratio within a certain ratio. I like to see my potash in the soil pretty high. I may try cutting down on some of that, but right now, I mean, all of our soils test, medium to high and phosphate and potash, and I've still been putting out the same amount of nitrogen in the soil. So, I would caution not to go into it thinking the first year or two that you're going to cut fertilizer.
Yeah, that's kind of advanced soil health right there. Not that it can't be done, but I think you're right there, Sledge. I'm just curious, when you talk about terminating, how tall and what do you use? I know you said you sprayed. Do you use anything else? I know we got a lot of rollers out there, roller crimpers, people using cola-packers, those kinds of things. Have you played around any of that?
No, I haven't played around with the cola-packers or rollers. I do have a roller, 12 roller. It's a plain roller, but I think it'll work to roll it down. So I'm gonna try it on a little bit this year. When we terminate the crop, I've just been using Roundup and or generic Roundup and dicamba. And that time of year, you can just use a regular dicamba, and it takes care. I mean, it pretty well cleans the field up, and there's nothing out there. And I kind of let some years you get better growth on your cover crop. Some years maybe not quite as good because you've had a cold winter. But I just kind of back up. If I'm going to plant my cotton the first week in May, I start looking to terminate the crop sometimes around the first week in April. Like I say, you can go to the middle of April. Maybe you can. I'd sure burn down within 2 weeks of planting. Now, like I say, you start there, and if you want to try some of your rolling, you can do that too. But I think it's really critical the first year you get started to make sure your cover crop's dead before you plant.
Let me get two more questions, and then we'll kick into the economic side of the thing here. There's several questions again about this slugs, cutworms, nematodes. Again, have you had any bad experiences related to your cover crop you selected being a harbor for any of those? You saw an increase?
I have not. I mean, occasionally you see a slug, but occasionally they'll go out there and maybe eat a cotyledon leaf. I've never had a infestation of slugs. we do get either in our no-till or with our cover crop, we do get these little snails, these little tiny hardback snails. They're about the size of, well, a little bit bigger than a pencil eraser. And I've seen maybe 10 or whatever on a little cotyledon type cotton, and they'll bend it over sometimes, but they never hurt it, and they'll eventually die. And then you've got all these little shells out there that are full of calcium and phosphorus.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, that's good stuff. And then the last question, I'm kind of baiting you here a little bit. So how long did it take before you started to see the benefits, and kind of what was the turning point to say, yeah, I really need to go full bore with the cover crops?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think after your first cover crop, you'll see advantages. Now with me, and I told you how our mindset is, I mean, I would plant a cover crop, I'd have good success with it. I'd have good success with my crop afterwards. And I'd say, I'm going to do that next year. I'm going to plant more. And somehow between the cup and the lip, there's a slip. I don't know. It's just the mindset. And I'd say I was going to do it, and then we'd get there and I'd be busy and I wouldn't do it. So I just think, there again, make up your mind that you're going to, after that first year, you're going to continue it. And
Make it a priority.
Make it a priority.
Yeah, you wouldn't. Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to switch over. I'm going to bring Archie Flanders, who's our ag economist with the Soil Health Institute, who actually interviewed Sledge a few weeks ago, and he came up with what they call a partial budget. And I'm going to let Archie explain what that is, because, well, I'm not going to say anything. And then we're going to get some feedback from Sledge to see if he agrees with what Archie's come up with as far as whether it's profitable or not. So Archie, go ahead and take it away there, buddy. And if you want to give a better introduction than I gave yourself, feel free to do that. I'm not real good at that, Archie. I'm sorry.
Dave, can you hear me something? I maybe lost a connection or something. There we go. Can you hear me fine?
We got you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute, but go ahead. Yeah, we got you.
All right, thank you. Well, Dave, appreciate the introduction. That was fine. I am the agricultural economist for the Soil Health Institute. What we want to take a look at in the economics portion is answer the question, is there a business case for farmers adopting soil health management systems? Specifically, do soil health management systems increase farm profitability? We've heard Sledge discuss his experiences, and we're going to look at some of the results that we got from our conversations with him earlier. We want to, first of all, take a look and keep in mind that we're comparing cost and benefits. And the cost and benefits come from incremental production changes that affect 4 components of farm profitability. When you adopt the soil health management system, keep in mind, it's not a complete overhaul. Many, if not most of the field activities and the way you're producing will be unchanged. So it's incremental production changes. The 4 areas are, number 1, reduced expenses as a benefit when you adopt the soil health management system. Number 2, potentially there's additional revenue as a benefit, primarily from increased yield. There will be additional expenses, which are a cost when you adopt the soil health management system. Also, potentially there could be reduced revenue, would also be a cost if you have to incur a yield loss as you adopt the soil health management system. And then the summation of 1 and 2, the benefits, minus the summation of 3 and 4, are the net impact of the production change. And as Dave said, we did what's referred to as partial budget analysis from the information we collected from Sledge, and it's a ledger type system. You see on the left in green, we have the benefits. On the right, we have the cost. If you are doing conventional tillage and you go to no-till, first thing that happens is you have reduced expenses of all the tillage costs, the equipment, the fuel, the labor, everything involved with tillage. The equipment would be equipment ownership. We have a way of putting cost per acre to the original cost of the equipment based on the time that you're not using the equipment because you have adopted no-till. Potentially, the other production inputs could change. These would mostly, if they do occur, would be after many years of adopting no-till and cover crops. And then labor and other operating expenses and equipment ownership are the total reduced expenses. After you adopt the soil health management system, you could have additional revenue. The first way this could happen if you have an increased yield. Also, potentially, you could have an increased crop price. And some crops, especially corn and soybean, if adopting a soil health management system is what allows you to plant a non-GMO seed, you would receive most likely a price premium for this. Also, you could potentially realize increased revenue from grazing the cover crops, or sometimes if you don't have cattle to graze them, you can harvest the cover crops as forage for additional revenue. Now, on costs for adopting a soil health management system, if you're going to plant cover crops, of course, the first cost is going to be the seed. And then you'll have all the production inputs, labor, other operating expenses, and equipment ownership from adopting the soil health management system. And if you incur a decreased yield, this will be a reduced revenue, which will also be a cost. So finally, we take the summations of everything on the left, all the benefits, and summations of everything on the right, the cost. We take the benefits minus the cost. And if this is a positive number, the change in net farm income is an increase. Keep in mind that partial budget results are changes in net farm income, not absolute levels. The numbers that we'll see today will be changes from what Sledge was doing in conventional tillage. When you do this type of analysis with partial budget analysis, you don't involve yourself with the absolute level of farm income. It's the change in farm income that occurs because you have ceased a conventional production system and adopted a soil health management system. So we met with Sledge and went through his production practices, and we applied our methodology. And these are the results that we got for corn and cotton. Sledge did show peanuts, but when we talked with him, he said he just had initiated that, so he didn't have enough experience to report to us the difference. So today, our results will just be for the corn and cotton. So you see for the corn, we have as we looked at earlier, all our benefits, then all the costs. Now, of course, as Sledge went from conventional tillage to no-till, the first thing that happens, all the equipment costs, $26.03, are now reduced. All the labor and fuel associated with that is also a reduction. And Sledge's cover crop seed cost, the blend that he showed us earlier, was the cost of this is $22 per acre. I saw that come up on one of the questions. How much was the cost? The cost for the seed is $22 an acre. And then other associated costs with planting the cover crop totals up to $51.31, but the reductions are $76. So in this case, without even looking at the yield, Sledge's net farm income has increased because he has reduced expenses more than what was required to increase to go with no-till and cover crops. Now, when we talked to Sledge earlier about corn, he told us that he had been able to reduce his phosphorus applications on corn by 40 units. And so that's part of this number. The other number in here is lime reductions. Previously, Sledge said he was having to lime his fields every so many years, but now he had cut that rate to half what it used to be. And that is the $5.25 per acre for cotton, because that was the only fertilizer reduction for cotton, and Sledge didn't report to us any phosphorus decreases for cotton. So back over to corn, the yield increase over time. Remember, Sledge has been doing this for many years. We're attributing 20 bushels per acre increase in corn. And keep in mind, the way we discuss with Sledge is, what is your yield increase due to the soil health management system? Over this period of time since the 80s that Sledge has been doing this, everybody's yields have been increasing just because seeds and other technology have improved. But Sledge was able to zero in on the yield increase that he exclusively attributes to the soil health management system over what it would be if he was doing conventional till. So for corn, if you add up the expenses, the reduced expenses and the revenue, the total benefits are $160 per acre. And then the total cost, $51.31, there was no yield reduction. So our calculations show that Sledge has increased his net farm income for corn by $108.69. We have similar calculations for cotton. Sledge was using the same cover crop seed mix for cotton that he was corn. It's $22 an acre. And then we have all the reduced expenses and then additional expenses for going to no-till cover crop. The reduction is greater than the additions. So Sledge has increased his net farm income without any regard to potentially what happened to yield. Now, similar as we had an increase in corn yield due to the soil health management system, Sledge reported to us that his cotton yield, he thought, was 100 pounds per acre greater than what it would be if he had stayed with conventional till without cover crops. These prices that we're applying to the corn yield increase and the cotton yield increase are long-term averages. We wanted to get a value that would be from a long-term perspective and not conditioned on lower prices as they were several months ago, and now higher prices for corn, especially as they are now. So we took long-term average prices for both crops, sum up the benefits for cotton. Total benefits are $129.80. Total cost for the soil health management system for cotton is $55.88. So the net is $73.92. So with our calculations, we estimate that Sledge has increased his net farm income for both corn and cotton. The increase for corn being $108.69, and the increase for cotton being $73.92. So Sledge, we appreciate you going through this with us, and if you'd like to comment on anything, I'd like for you to. Also, I see one cost item that I failed to cover. Sledge he talked about irrigation, but he reported that he has been able to decrease his irrigations. One application, this was the furrow irrigated land, one furrow application for both corn and cotton. And this is part of the fuel and electricity. Of course, most of this is going to be the fuel for the equipment that have been reduced, but some of this is also the reduction in irrigation energy expenses. So Sledge, would you take a look at what we did and comment on some of these? How long did it take for these benefits to to be realized as you adopt the soil health management system? And you see anything particularly you'd like to comment about our analysis?
Well, I think first I want to point out that I tried to be very conservative in the estimates that I gave you, not so much about the yield, but about the cost. The yield is somewhat subjective. It's my best guess, but I think 100 pounds of cotton and 20 bushel of corn is very, very reasonable. I don't think it's unreasonable. If you trim a little bit off of that, even if you're skeptical or whatever, you're still seeing a net increase. And I would say, a couple of years, if you're doing no-till and cover crops, I think after a couple of years, you'll see these benefits. Probably after the first year, you'll see some benefits, and then I think the benefits will just kind of accrue probably gradually after that. And I just want to point out it is kind of an art form. It is kind of just a different way of thinking, and but I think all that's pretty accurate. And if anybody wanted to argue with anything, they might want to argue with the yields. But there again, I think that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah. Well, that's what kind of jumps out at me, Sledge. Even if you take the yield out of it, you're still getting $25 potential on corn and another $7 or $8 on the cotton. Because all you hear is that's going to cost me. It's going to cost me. But I think Archie's done a good job looking at, well, you got to look at it more than just the one thing. There's more to it if you adopt and moving into a system. And I think you mentioned it earlier, even as your equipment change, you're using this tractor because you just felt you had a need to justify using a 300 horse tractor. You had to get it out of the barn like a good thoroughbred to use it once in a while, not because you really needed it anymore.
Right.
So you probably wouldn't be buying that anymore on that again if you need to.
Yeah,
Archie, is this kind of what you've been seeing? I mean, I'm not going to, I know you've been involved with a big one. Is this unusual? I know you've done 100 plus of these. I'm not going to, is this common or is it abnormal or what is this?
Right. During the previous year, John Shanahan, my colleague at the Soil Health Institute, has been conducting interviews with 125 farmers. And this is very similar to what we have realized from all these interviews. Of course, most of these were corn, soybean farmers. We had many cotton farmers. Most of them were corn and soybeans, but the results that we're seeing here from Sledge's operation for adopting a soil health management system is very much in line with what we have realized in 125 other farm interviews.
That's good to know.
Well, I think, again, it was kind of like I mentioned at the start of the program where, everybody said, where's the science? So we start to present the science, and now we're saying, where's the economics? And efforts like what Archie's doing is showing that there is an economic advantage, and it's not, I mean, I don't know, $100 that seems like real money to me. I don't know if you take that times, I don't know how many acres you got there. Maybe I shouldn't do the math on the air here. That might get people misleading there, but that seemed like a lot of money when you look at it that way. So one question did come up to me as I was thinking about, so you attributed yield increases specifically to soil health. Can you give me 2 or 3 things that you feel changed in your soil that resulted in this increase in yield?
Well, one that comes to mind is, and there again, it's subjective, but I'll use the 2-week rule. We're always about 2 weeks away from a drought. And certainly in the growing season, and you go 2 weeks without rain, you're beginning to see a little stress in your crop. And I really think I've been able, through no-till and these cover crops, stretch that out to 3 weeks before I see the same type of stress. So that gives you another week to get that rain. And quite often you'll get that rain in that 3rd week, so to speak. Now I know one of these days I'm going to get that terrible drought that just doesn't ever rain, and that's going to be a different picture. But that's one example of what I see. And it's just so easy. I mean, it takes a lot of the stress. Now, it's a lot of stress at planting time because you kind of need to, you just don't set the planter and leave the field. So it's a lot of stress at planting time. But once you kind of get onto it, it takes a little stress out of the timeliness maybe of some of the soil preparation and everything else that you see. And the soil structure, I mean, David, I on my way driving here, I saw a lot of bare soil on the way down here, and you just see the middles have kind of silted in. There's not a speck of green out in the field, and those raindrops, when those raindrops hit the soil, they splash it up, and the soil's crusting over. And when you plant on it, you get a big heavy rain on it, and that soil's going to crust, and it really does not crust, and there's no-till, not like it does. It's a little different, but the seed will generally push through it in no-till, where I've had in conventional till, I've had, crust 1/4 inch deep, get on top of the cotton, and it has a little trouble pushing out sometimes. So that's just a few examples.
Yeah, I think that's two great examples. I know there's science behind the first one. Dr. Jerry Hatfield did some work in Iowa that basically showed that most yield loss, and it's like 80% of the yield loss, it doesn't occur from the 2012 severe droughts. That's obviously catastrophic. But in any given year, it's that 2, 3, or 4 day window when moisture is needed and the plants need at that critical stage to put on yield, whether it be pod fill or whatever. And that's, if you can avoid that, it's hard to put. Well, you're putting 100 pounds value on it. That's what that is. So I think that's really critical. Archie, can I get you to stop sharing your screen there? I think we're about time. Unless you got any final comments, I hate to cut you off there, Archie. I really appreciate what you showed there because I think it has a lot of value, and hopefully we'll get folks to keep considering that. So, you got any other comments you want to make here?
No, that was everything. We covered all the analysis, and we appreciate Sledge visiting with us and giving us the information to do this analysis.
I appreciate working with you.
And I appreciate having someone like Archie on because he's a bona fide economist. Someone like, I could tell you the same thing. I didn't carry much weight, but when you got people that know about those kinds of things that are, putting forth a proven method to help stem this myth, so to speak, I think that really adds value to what we're doing. Well, listen, I'm going to bring this thing to a conclusion. Although I do have one question for Parker. He's been sitting there very nicely. We did have a question. Want to know if Delta Farm offered on-farm assistance. If I come in the door, what would you do for me, Parker?
Absolutely. First thing I'm going to say is reach out, contact me. You can find my contact anywhere. The best place to find it is go to our website, deltafarm.org. Look me up, call me. My personal number's on there. You can get in touch with me. Sign up for Delta Farm. Delta Farm is free membership. We can come out and talk to you about anything, any concerns you may have on your farm, if you have interest in government programs, or you just need to know what Delta Farm is, reach out, give me a call. We would love to talk to you. We have members all over the Delta, as I mentioned, 1.5 million acres, Most likely we're going to know your neighbors. Most likely we've worked with your neighbors. So feel free to call me. There's not a dumb question. We'll help you with anything. If we can't help you, we're going to put you on the right track to getting that help.
There you go.
But yeah, reaching out and contacting us.
Well, I've only gotten to know Parker this way. I have never met him personally, and what I can tell, this young man has got a passion for soil health. And he's willing to learn, and so I would say take advantage of the offer that he just made, and I just really appreciate the enthusiasm that he's showing me. So let me kind of bring this thing to conclusion. I want to invite everybody next week, same time, 2:00 Eastern. We're going to have let the state of Texas talk about soil health. They're going to showcase some farmers. They've got some long-term studies that's been done by the AgriLife folks there. They want to just highlight. But we also have about six farmers are going to be involved. It's going to be probably a 2-hour session. So you might want to make sure you bring some water and sit in a couple of chairs because they're going to give it to you a couple more there. And then after that, we're going to move into Arkansas. We're going to have folks from California. Georgia's going to talk about cotton and soy and peanuts there. Can't do that. We're going to move into have a guy who's practicing soil health and doing some stuff in North Carolina, but he also runs a cotton gin. Has got some interesting perspectives. Then the lessons from 8 years of the regenerative ag. That'll be a young man, along with Sonny Price from South Carolina. Been doing a great job. Been doing this for 8, 9, 10 years. And if you want to know about cutting out fertilizers, make sure you listen on that one, because Sonny he'll blow your mind, because he's pretty well done away with any kind of synthetic P and K in his farming operation. And then the last one we're going to conclude with is having some leaders from various ag industry talk about why soil health is important to the future of U.S. cotton. So hopefully you can participate in all those. And if you can, again, we're going to record these and make them available later on. And with that, I just say thank you and have a good day, rest of your day. Thanks for joining. Bye.